Hey, everybody. Today we have for you podcast number 120. Today's podcast is titled, Who Wants to Be a Wise Guy? Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. We are Dr. Pete and Sandy Lombardi, and this is the Limitless Life Network podcast where we flesh out the limitations that are preventing you from reaching goals and living the life that you are called to lead. And this is season number
4.
Yeah, season 4. Can't believe it, but this is the first podcast in the year 2025. So we've made it through another year and onward and upward, as they say. And we want to start the podcast like we did all of last year by saying what?
Thank you for being in our listener community and for sharing and encouraging others by sharing this podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. And today's topic, we're actually recording it in the latter afternoon. It's gotten dark out already. We just had a lot of things in the front end of the day that pushed us back. And this was a little bit of an arduous process of putting this one together. I think both of our brains start to become less efficient toward the evening.
Well, and part of the dynamic was we were at the dining room table and Grace is cooking in the kitchen and talking to us the entire time. And it was actually great because we had some of the best conversation and discussion we've had in a while.
Yeah, she was loving it. She was just commentating and chirping in. It was really funny. So yeah, that was a good moment. Good moment for sure. So today's topic, today's title, Who Wants to Be a Wise Guy, came from a message that was given at our church that I didn't get to see, but I watched it on YouTube. So, which is really kind of funny that I watched it on YouTube. We're going to talk about that too.
But our pastor is away. They're in Uganda right now serving. And so one of our senior leaders, Jeff Snyder, brought a message this Sunday. And he's a high school teacher. I believe he teaches economics and government. And so he has a gift to teach. And so his message was about wisdom.
Yeah, it's really good. So great job, Jeff Snyder, if you're actually listening to our podcast. We are stealing your content, borrowing it, sharing it. That's the source.
It was so good.
It was really good.
Others need to hear it.
Yeah, so it's great because we actually had some friends over on Christmas in the evening, and Ross, he talked about YouTube University. He's a listener too.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
that's kind of funny because our first point is YouTube University enrollment is at an all-time high. That's point number 1.
Because Jeff mentioned this as well on Sunday.
Yes, and so I am enrolled in YouTube University. I don't know if you realize that, but I have gained lots of knowledge, information about a multitude of topics.
Framing, electrical,
plumbing, long-range shooting, all of these crazy off-the-wall topics. And I imagine some of you are enrolled in YouTube University as well, and you have watched lots and lots of content on different topics. Maybe you're watching this podcast on YouTube University as well. But the point is that we have lots and lots of information. There's never been a time in history when we haven't had information at this level. I mean, we have more information than ever, and we've mentioned this a couple of years ago. About there isn't a shortage of information,
right.
But what we have disproportional is experience.
Yeah. So
we have lots of info, but not a lot of applicable, actionable wisdom.
Well,
right?
And we were talking about this with Grace because she was saying, well, I don't have a teacher. She's that was a slam on me a little bit,
She
likes, I'm her homeschool teacher.
She likes to do that. Yeah. It's 13. She's 13.
And we're like, well, yes, you do. We can all be our own teacher in terms of here with YouTube University, but it's the application. So today she was trying to teach herself to make yonki. And we're like, well, you're teaching yourself to make yonki. So you're actually doing it. You're experiencing it. You're taking that step. You're making mistakes and you're refining it and pulling up different recipes to try and figure it out. So that's the application side.
Yeah. So that's point number one, just to realize that we are living in an age where everybody has access to lots of information, but we have a deficiency of people actually going out and doing things and experiencing things. So, where do you fall in that? Are you somebody that consumes a lot of content but doesn't actually apply what you learn? So that brings us to point number 2.
The Spider-Man point.
Yeah. If you've ever watched any of the Spider-Man movies or the Spider-Man comics, one of the lines, and I'm not a huge follower of any of that stuff, but one of the lines that is very memorable is with great power comes great responsibility. And this is something that Jeff was talking about as a history buff. Our culture, or not our culture, but the United States of America is a very unique country. And it is unique because it was formed out of the attempt to escape tyranny, which was, based and founded with godly principles. And with that, people all of a sudden, we're all created equal, right? And we all have equal and unalienable rights as citizens here, and it's pretty amazing. It's not a perfect system that we have, but it is the best in the world, and that's you can argue that, but I would not want to live anywhere else. So I feel very blessed in that regard. But we have this autonomy, and we have free will, and with that comes great responsibility, because what guides you to making good decisions, and what is, I guess, the intention behind the decisions that you make and the actions that you take. And when you take God out of the equation, all of a sudden what's left is, I'm going to do everything for me. It's all going to be about glorifying one's self. Versus when God is at the center of the table, when God is put first in the center of the community, he, sent his son Jesus as this sacrifice that nobody deserves, but everybody gets. And when that's at the center of your community, now it's a constant reminder that it's not about yourself. It's about serving others and loving and giving grace and forgiveness, and even if people don't deserve it. So with great responsibility, or with great power comes great responsibility,
Right.
is the Spider-Man principle. And how does that really tie into all of this information that we get and all of this? Well, it comes down to really, point number 3.
Yes.
This ties it together. So,
Being a wisdom seeker.
yeah. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I'm just not sure how far we're going with that one.
Well, let's talk about the story of, Solomon.
Okay. So Jeff referenced in the Bible, in First Kings, and it's also mentioned in Chronicles. But King David and the whole relationship with Bathsheba, and son is born, Solomon becomes king. And in a dream, he speaks to God, and God asks him, you can ask me anything that you want. And Solomon asks him for a great understanding of the citizens that he's ruling, and to discern from right and wrong. So he was basically asking for wisdom.
Right.
And God is pleased with his heart in asking for that and grants him much, much more. But so Jeff's point was, how important it is to seek wisdom from God in our situations. He said in our own mind, there can be 10 different great scenarios, that possibilities for whatever you're working on. And they could all possibly be great. They're good things, right? but what's the right one for the situation? What's the right one for your family and for you and the community? And so seeking God of what his direction would be. And, we were talking about as a church body, we're growing and expanding, and there's so many decisions to be made, and they need to be made with the Holy Spirit's guidance. And he was encouraging us to apply that in our personal lives.
I think a lot of us and I don't know how about if a lot of us, but it's more common that we look for God, we turn to God in times that are bad because we're desperate. And then we can be grateful when times are great. But most of life, and I think this is something that he really hit, it's a good point, is that most of life is in between there. Most of life is between the high points and the low points. We're oscillating in between there more often. But that's when your consistency with seeking God for these decisions is a much more pleasing thing to God. But also, this is why Solomon became great. That's why Solomon had all the riches, right? Like his kingdom was amazing because he really was taught from a young age to seek God and to seek this discernment. And he wanted a discerning heart and the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And so many times we look at things and they look so good, and I am guilty of this. It looks so good. It sounds so good on paper, and I go all in on it. But I didn't really ask God because I thought it was great, but I never really said, "Hey, God, is this the way I should be going?" Because if you get crickets, it probably isn't.
Well, and one of the things Jeff mentioned too is when we're most passionate about something, like we're going at it full throttle, that's often when we don't take the time to stop and talk to God about it and seek what, he would give, how he would advise us. And some of you might be thinking, well, how am I going to hear from God? How is he going to communicate that with me? And I think that's spending time in his word. In the word is where you're going to, it will be revealed. You'll be shocked at just how you could read any chapter and it will somehow apply to the questions that you have.
Yeah, that's I couldn't have said that better myself, but I've experienced that for sure. All year long, it's been way better being in the Word and having that be the first thing. So
well, and I think interesting that kind of leads us to point number 4: don't sleep on the older generation. And I think sometimes when I'm reading, it just sets my heart in the right place. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to ask so and so about their experience in this or their wisdom, if you would, because I know they've experienced this thing that I'm trying to focus on or make a decision in. So that's the point number 4 is, looking to, often it's the older generation that has more experience than we do and wisdom.
And unfortunately, I'm seeing this now with the younger generation as our children are now, into adulthood, and they have a different take on our wisdom. They hear it, but don't always necessarily think that we're up to date, right? And so older generations, a lot of times, like when they, like I'm thinking of my father-in-law, he has so much wisdom when it comes to engines and small engine repair and even your own vehicle. Like he just knows so much about how things work. And if I ever have a problem, I can just call him up and he'll walk me through and he'll talk to me for 2 hours about everything and give me the history behind it. It's more than I need, but I soak it up because I know someday it's not going to be available. And I can't look that up on YouTube, right? Because nobody has that level of experience. 60 years in that business it's just going to die with him, right? And I made me think of the pyramids. The pyramids, like today, are one of the 7 wonders of the world because we don't know how they built them. Like we've got really smart people and we've got all kinds of technology, and we can't really duplicate what was built that's still standing today. So there was obviously generations that just kind of gave up on that knowledge. It was lost somewhere in time. and it may never be captured again. I don't know. But that made me think of that like this older generation has so much wisdom. Don't sleep on it. Like take advantage of it and open your heart to what they have to share, because I learned so much from the older people in my practice. I learn it from just people that I know that have more wisdom than I do. So you can learn so much more from other people's mistakes and experiences than you can on your own. So,
well, I think like Jeff brought this point up too, like we can, criticize the next generation, which say our kids, right? We criticize that generation, but who raised them? We did, right? So taking responsibility and really reflecting, like, why is it that way? And what can we do are we being a good example of being a good listener and conveyor of wisdom? So I think from generation to generation, being intentional of passing on that wisdom and the, kind of lost art of listening and having, a lot of time it was legends and stories, right? And, so,
do you want to say something about that, about the book that you've been reading?
Well, I've been reading a book about a missionary, Bruce Olson, and I might have mentioned this before, but
you have
recently. It's now more current, and so the changes in that population now that they're third generation out from when he first went, he's been there 50 years, and how this generation, so let's say the second generation started being exposed to educational opportunities outside of the jungle, and they would go to schooling, but they would always come back and just bring what they learned back to their jungle communities, whether it be serving in a medical center or teaching in one of their schools. But then the next generation would go off to university and want to stay or bring a lot of westernized things back. And so little by little, they're losing that respect for their original culture. And he just, in the books talks about how detrimental in many ways. There's a lot of benefits, obviously, in education and schooling and crops and things. But for the most part, the negative side of losing that, I guess, bigger picture of who they are and where they came from and the beauty of the jungle and the things that they were taught. And
so that brings us to point number 4,
yeah, it does.
which is get your hands dirty.
Number 5.
Or 5, sorry, point 5. My mistake. Get your hands dirty. And I was just thinking as you were speaking about that and these lost ways, right, that are starting to slowly, you're hearing about that. But there's many lost ways if we talk about the pyramids and so forth. But those ways were developed out of necessity, right? So because there was so much experience, like there wasn't any library to look anything up. There wasn't a internet.
Well, if you wanted to eat, you were
So like there was
yeah.
the motivation was the problem at hand, right? So to solve the problem, you had to just keep trying, and you would try things until something worked. And then if it worked great, could you make it better? Could you make it more efficient? And so that's how many of these things were developed. And that's how learning takes place today. We were talking with Grace about that. Like she's reading about, how to make this recipe. She was inspired by watching something on TV, and now she's doing it. She's got her hands covered in gnocchi, like it's all sticky, flour, egg, and potato. And she's like, oh, look at my hands, and she's making these things and they look great. So she's going to cook them and eat them herself. And that's her experience. So all of us need to roll up our sleeves and take just, a little bit of this knowledge that you learn and go apply it. And that's true learning. And that's where you'll develop wisdom, right? So when you read things and say you're reading the Word of God and you're reading it, there's going to be opportunity to apply it, to get your hands dirty, to talk about what you've learned, to share what you've read, to impart some of that wisdom, that knowledge that you've gained. That's where true wisdom comes from. Yeah, from applying it. So anything else you want to say about
it was
getting your
good.
hands dirty?
You wrapped us up good.
I wrapped us up good. So it's the wrap up, everybody. So that's a wrap for this week's edition of your weekly Limitless Life Network podcast. Be sure to tune in each and every week so you can stay connected, be inspired, and keep moving toward your best life by stripping away your limitations. And we will see you back next week.
Have a great week.